Welcome to Pleasure Uprising. I'm Dr. Laura Juergens, intimacy coach, somatic practitioner, and your guide to getting out of your head and into your body, your desire, and your real capacity for connection. This show is for people who are done performing and ready to actually feel it. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. So we're going to talk about something today that I think is really common and kind of low-key flies under the radar for a lot of couples who are struggling with either mismatched libidos or just sort of missing each other sexually or feeling like the spark is gone and haven't identified some common dynamics in their relationship that may be contributing. Now, some people absolutely know that this is happening and absolutely know that this is contributing, but it's also really common for not everybody to be aware of that, or definitely not both people in a partnership sometimes. So we're going to talk about inadvertent parent-child dynamics that nobody really signed up for in a romantic relationship and what that does to your sex life. So you may be one of those people who sometimes is, hanging out in the kitchen maybe. Your partner is standing with the fridge door open, asking, what is there to eat? Or you get a text from them asking something that they absolutely could have figured out on their own, like, where are my pants? Or they give you this look that's like this real sulky look because you said not tonight after they did some sort of basic adulting. And it feels to you like they wanted sex as sort of a cookie, as a reward. If any of those things are happening and you're also feeling kind of a low-key ick from your partner, you may be in a situation where you are sort of inadvertently in a parent-child dynamic with your partner. And if you are somebody who is recognizing themselves in the partner, where you may be kind of leaning on your partner a little bit to parent you, inadvertently usually, this may be contributing to what's going on with your sexual dynamic. And on the surface, for some people, these things seem very unrelated. Like chores and sex may feel kind of unrelated. They're not. They're a way of being together in a partnership that really impacts your intimacy. So we're going to connect the dots today. We're going to talk about where the parent-child dynamics can come from. There's 3 main forms of them that we're going to talk about today, and what to do about it, whichever role you are finding yourself in. Now, I want to start with a little caveat because we are not talking about age play here. Mommy dom, daddy play, playing baby, any consensual dynamic that uses parent-child roles explicitly and erotically. That is 100% different from what we're talking about today, which is non-consensually sliding into unwanted parental roles in your day-to-day in your relationship. When you're actually intentionally playing with age play, those are chosen, negotiated, and can be exactly what people want. That's a whole different dynamic. That's a whole different, intentionally chosen kink. Yay. We're going to talk today about what happens when you've accidentally slid into unwanted parent-child dynamics. And it tends to be sort of a low-key, deeply unsexy. There's something unsexy here. And I see this in all kinds of relationships, but I will say it is most common that I see this in hetero relationships, but I have seen it in queer relationships as well. And it also kind of comes in and out sometimes in pretty much all kinds of relationships based on capacity, sometimes things that are shifting in your work-life balance. There can be kind of moments where this comes in and really impacts your connection and your intimacy, even if it's not kind of an ongoing, multi-year kind of dynamic. So it's worth knowing about and being aware of, even if you don't feel like this is currently happening in your relationship. It is sort of a little trap that jumps out and bites people sometimes. So I want everybody to be aware of it because it can be pretty easy to slide into by accident. So first, let's talk about the 3 forms. What does this look like? Now, I am going to be, I want to say that I don't feel like there's any reason to be ashamed of this accidentally happening in your relationship. I think if you are really wedded to having your partner parent you and you feel entitled to it, that is a problem if your partner does not agree that that's what they want to be doing for the rest of their life. But it's really easy to fall into these things just from, and we'll talk about where they come from, but just from kind of our upbringing. And so I think it's really worth being aware of and cognizant of and understanding and owning it. But I don't feel like I definitely don't want to shame anybody who's in this. So with that said, let's look at these 3 types, these 3 forms. So form number 1, really, really common, is a chore-based parentification. And this is where one partner is avoiding adulting, and so the other partner has to take more of the burden for the shit that just needs to happen in a household. So this typically happens with cohabitating partners. And this is where there's like more of a burden for the home, the kids, the planning, all that stuff on one partner. And it's not balanced or intentional. Now, sometimes this can be really balanced and intentional because you have one person who's working outside the home and one person who's working inside the home, for example. But a lot of times everybody's working outside the home or everybody's working, even if they're working at home. And this often falls on women. So it's not always. And I have definitely seen the reverse happen. But it's where one person is sort of taking on way more of the how to get the kids to school, how to get the laundry done, what are we eating for dinner, making all that stuff happen. And they do it, and then they get slowly and slowly more resentful and more resentful over time. So here's some examples. And these are, I would say pretty extreme examples, but it happens in a lot more subtle ways as well. Here's an extreme example. She makes your dentist appointments for you. There's a dentist who's really funny who I follow on Instagram who had this like mind-blowing post that was really like kind of a little bit viral about how he had a man come in who didn't know why he was there, didn't know why he was sitting in the dentist chair because he hadn't even made his own appointment. And this is a really extreme example, but this is, really, really related. Like I would bet money that his wife, who made the appointment for him, it turned out, does not want to sleep with this man because he's not adulting. Quick break. If you are listening to this show, something in your intimate life may not be where you want it to be. And if you've been trying to think or talk your way through it and it's not quite working, that's not a you problem. That's just a method problem. I made a free guide to help called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has some reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll typically find in a freebie, and most people feel something shift after just the first one. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide, and the link is in the show notes. So another example, like your partner has to remind you 10 times to pick up your own parents from the airport. Or you make all the meals. Or the fridge door, they're standing, they're like, where's the ketchup? While they're like, they want you to stop what you're doing and go find it instead of looking for themselves, right? Your partner doesn't look for things they lost. They just ask you where it is. Or your partner watching the kids acts like they're amazing for babysitting their own children, right? And these are red flags in a relationship, right? This is, I am not adulting and I want you to pick up the slack. And that is deeply, deeply unsexy for the vast majority of people. So if that's happening, that is one place where you have entered into a parent-child dynamic with your partner, and then you might wonder, why do they not want to have sex with me? Well, that's why. Okay, form number 2. This is one that the first one I see most often women taking the over chore role, but definitely not all the time. And I've definitely seen men do it, and I've seen it in queer relationships for sure. Form number 2, I almost always see from a man, and this is what I call good boy syndrome. That's not a clinical term. That is just my term. But it is the dynamic where you're expecting sex almost like a reward for good behavior. And then there's this like sulking dynamic, kind of like the golden retriever who didn't get the biscuit. If someone says, no, I'm not up for it right now, that's not what I want. And it's kind of this like, I mowed the lawn. I took out the trash. I folded my own laundry. So of course you should want to have sex with me. I'm a good guy. It can also be the form of, I paid the bills, so I'm entitled to sex. And it's like this emotional coercion thing. It feels really passive aggressive and manipulative, generally very unsexy. It is not, the person is like doing some of the adulting, but then they're expecting your body as a reward, as if they don't need to just adult on their own because they're an adult, as if they get a reward for it. And that reward is you having sex with them, whether or not you want to. It's this like vague sense of obligation mixed with resentment that often is happening for the partner who's on the receiving end of this. And it's one of the most reliable ways to shut someone down is this, what I call good boy syndrome. So that's form number 2, where there's some adulting going on, but they're like expecting, to be rewarded with sex for it. Okay, form number 3, and this I see really common in people socialized across the gender spectrum, has no real gendered patterns. This is anxiety-based, where the inner child is kind of almost, of one partner, is kind of like running the relationship. And it looks like having a need for validation that your partner likes you, won't leave, etc., and seeking it through whatever behavior you've attached to as validating. So you need to text me at a certain frequency or I lose my shit, right? You need to have sex with me at a certain frequency, whether you feel like it or not, because otherwise I'll feel bad or I'll feel invalid. You need to tell me I'm attractive at some, regular frequency. You need to basically alleviate my anxieties for me because I'm not managing them. And the version of this sort of like the failure to adult here is that this person is not caring for their own inner child. They're like throwing the baby at their partner. Like, I don't know how to validate myself, so here, you do it, and I'm going to put it all on you. And this is different than just sometimes needing reassurance. Everybody sometimes needs reassurance. That doesn't mean that you're having anxiety-based child-parent dynamics with your partner if you just sometimes need reassurance. It's okay to sometimes be vulnerable. It's okay to sometimes need reassurance. But this is when it's taken to extremes, when you really can't feel okay without the validation, when you're really sort of hyper aware of needing this particular form of validation or multiple forms of validation regularly from your partner, or you really don't feel okay. It's not uncommon for this to be the validation to actually be the act of sex. So like, I need sex 3 times a week, or I feel like you're rejecting me. But it's not always sex. It could be texting or affirmations or whatever kind of thing. And it can feel really desperate. And it can feel very, people can be very confused about why their partner says no. But I want to invite you to realize and recognize that when somebody's coming from a place of anxiety and really wanting you to solve that for them with your body, it almost feels like you're medicating them, that you are medication. You're not really at choice. And that is deeply unsexy. So we want to talk about how we get there and how we can get out. Okay, so how do we get here? We are, we're all adults in these relationships. How do we wind up in these dynamics? And so, all right, you've been around this podcast for a minute. you probably won't be surprised when I say surprise, part of it is patriarchy. But it is. We have cultural conditioning that lends itself to these types of parent-child dynamics, especially in heterosexual relationships, but again, not always. Because girls are socialized, people who are assigned female at birth are socialized to be predominantly to focus on caretaking and to focus on other people and making sure that they are comfortable and happy. And this is often it's not even often very overt in families, but it is incredibly powerful. And it's been passed down through generations. And the expectations they can be very subtle in families, but things like making sure that there's, the table is set might be something that a girl child is expected to do. Making sure that, somebody's feelings are taken care of. Cooking and cleaning are often taught to girls more than they're taught to boys. So sometimes this is actually just because somebody doesn't know how to do some of these basic things, especially for that chore-based form of parentification dynamics. But it's not always gendered, and it can get skewed when one person is stay-at-home too. If one person is stay-at-home and then it sort of becomes almost like that they do all the things, and it can get imbalanced if they are stay-at-home and the other person is working, or if they have, maybe they're in between. This can happen in between jobs. So say, your partner gets laid off, they're home for a while, and you start expecting they take on sort of the lion's share of housework, and then it's sort of slips into an expectation that they're going to do that, whether or not maybe they have a part-time job now, but they're still doing everything in the home, right? Or maybe it's because one person has some executive dysfunction. Maybe there's a little neurodivergence, and it's really hard for somebody to maintain the sort of knowing, okay, what kid needs to go where to what soccer practice or football or whatever, and whether the dry cleaning got picked up or those kind of things. And the neurotypical person winds up taking on the lion's share of that. There can be these parent-child dynamics that arise from a lot of different places, not just gender socialization. But one of the things I want to say about how we get here is that there's always a contribution of enabling by the chore doer, putting up with this business. And sometimes it's because we were trained that way. We were trained through gender socialization or through just our family dynamic or our family culture or our culture of origin to people please or to do things we don't want to do or to not have boundaries. But we gotta own that we are enabling it if we are, because in order to stop it, we got to spot it, right? And if we don't own that we're enabling it as the person who's doing the chores and getting resentful and feeling parentified, then we lose all of our power to do anything about it. So we got to own that we are bringing this to some extent on ourselves by tolerating it. And so it's really important to start, and that doesn't mean just like yelling at your partner and, making them the bad guy and getting in a fight about it. A lot of times that's how people start to deal with it is they, instead of actually having healthy boundaries, they start just getting mad. And that's often very ineffective. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the how to deal with this. But it is important to notice that this is a two-way street, right? Somebody has to allow themselves to be parentified and take responsibility for the other person. So the other thing about kind of the patriarchy and how we get into this sort of good boy syndrome for form number 2, when that is another aspect, it tends to be men that do that because men are socialized to feel entitled to sex and to feel entitled to rewards for good behavior because boys have such low expectations for good behavior relative to girls in our modern society and in historical society in the last millennia. So because the expectations for behavior for boys are so low, when they actually behave like reasonable human beings, a lot of times they're trained in their family of origin to expect some sort of reward, approval, or, in the case of once you grow up, sex from your partner. That it becomes almost like her duty to reward you for being a quote unquote good guy. And it's actually a form of learned helplessness for men, which is pretty icky. And I think it's really worth noticing and calling out in a relationship dynamic if that's happening, because it is really deeply unsexy, and it removes, it makes sex a duty, and it really removes the expectation to just adult at a normal adult level from men in that situation. And I think that's a shame, and it's patronizing to them. And men are perfectly capable of adulting, absolutely capable. A lot of them don't realize that they're capable, but they are. So number 3, though, the anxiety piece. How do we get there? And that's an interesting one, because the anxiety form of parent-child dynamics, where we're actually just like asking our partner to validate us, it's not always through sex. It could be through words or actions or other things. But this kind of constant validation seeking, somewhere along the way, we didn't learn how to soothe ourselves. If we're somebody who's doing this, and we've let our inner critic typically run amok. And then now you're trying to outsource soothing yourself, or this person is trying to outsource soothing themselves and wrangling their inner critic to their partner, which is not only deeply unfair, but it also actually doesn't work, because no one else will ever be able to wrangle your inner critic. We just have a fantasy that if they could do everything we want exactly right, it would work and make us feel better, which is actually a child's fantasy. We only get to truly feel better in ourselves when our own inner adult steps up and parents our own inner child with kindness and firmness. And we can actually learn how to do that. You can learn how to parent your inner child so that you can learn how to self-validate, you can learn how to self-soothe. But it's useful to know where this comes from, because it's not always like a dysfunctional family dynamic. It can actually come from seemingly very loving families as well as neglectful or abusive ones. Because overindulgent or placating parenting actually also leads to a lack of self-soothing ability. Just like inconsistent caregivers, emotional neglect, or conditional love can wind up leading to someone who has challenges self-soothing. And it sucks if that's you. It sucks that you didn't learn how to self-soothe. I didn't learn how to self-soothe either. I just had to figure it out eventually, because there was nobody else around who was going to do it for me. And I did it pretty badly for the first many, many years of my life. But if you were in a situation where you learned early on in your childhood that you had to perform or shrink or constantly seek cues of approval to prevent being left behind, then maybe you didn't learn how to self-soothe. But also, if you had really indulgent parents, it could create the exact same result. So when we have caregivers that like immediately rescue a child from every moment of distress, the child never learns to develop a capacity to calm themselves down. They learn that emotional relief has to come from somewhere outside them, right? So if they had they got a bad grade, or they fell down, or they had, a challenge with something, or they didn't make the soccer team, and every single time something bad happens, they get taken out for ice cream or made much of, or if they cry, then the parent starts indulging them and just really kind of placating the child. They can actually learn that we need other people to make us feel better. And then a delayed text, from your partner in adulthood can feel like a catastrophe. And that tends to happen if anxiety was always treated like a catastrophe in your family, or if negative emotions in general were treated as something that was like an emergency, right? High drama neediness is the reliable way then to get connection and care in that kind of system. So you can have these very different childhoods, but with the same result where we missed out on learning how to self-soothe and how to validate ourselves. And we need to learn those skills. And I promise they can be learned, and they will make it so much easier to be in relationship with someone without it blowing up all the time or without you constantly feeling like you're not getting what you need. So the reason that these three different forms of parentification and parent-child dynamics in relationships can kill desire, because I want you to understand why this is so hard to overcome just by like wanting it to be different. When we shift out of feeling like an equal adult with someone, we wind up shifting into this sense of managing them, which feels like a burden. And what happens then is that we shift out of the state that desire needs. When we shift into managing, we are not in the state of being that desire actually needs to be present and grow. What gets shut down then is that felt sense of, I am safe to be erotic here. And I feel mutual adult curiosity with this person. What replaces it in that situation is I have to manage or caretake this person. And I am burdened by having to adult for them. And those are not compatible states. You can want to want your partner, but find out that your body has made a totally different decision because you feel regularly like you have to parent them. And so this is oftentimes really happening under the surface, and sometimes people don't even realize that these things are related. They don't realize that feeling overburdened by a partner who's not stepping up, or a partner who's sulking when they don't, get sex as a reward, or a partner who's always constantly seeking validation, they don't realize that that's actually putting a big brake on their libido. But it is in almost all situations where you feel parentified by your partner. The nervous system is not going to prioritize pleasure when it's in management mode. And that doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong with you. That's exactly what your nervous system's supposed to do. And so it's really important. And especially, so look, if you're in form number 3 with the validation seeking, the person in the child role is often wanting sex. And every time their partner says no, it actually feeds the anxiety, which intensifies the reassurance seeking and then deepens your partner's sense of burden. So it turns into this negative feedback loop, and both people end up feeling really stuck. And so the solution is often really hard to see from inside that loop, but it's not actually that hard to do. It's really that somebody needs to learn how to self-soothe and stop seeking validation so heavily externally. It's okay to seek a little. It's okay to seek a little reassurance. We're all human. But that really desperate sense of validation seeking, that's what's like fueling that pattern. And we need to help that person feel good about themselves regardless of what's happening with their partner. So what do we do? For all of these things, right? First off is just accepting that if it feels like a little bit of a parent-child dynamic in your relationship, it is not helping your sex life. It is often a giant brake on the desire, to use Emily Nagoski's terminology, which I love. And if it's your partner in taking on the more childlike role, you are going to have to look really hard at where and how you might be contributing to enabling that, where you're tolerating it, and have a very compassionate conversation about it, not an angry, accusatory conversation, which is not actually going to get you what you want. And you may need some help learning how to set limits, where you need to set, even figuring out like, okay, where do I really need to set limits, and having those conversations in a compassionate way. So what it needs to look like is you have to start feeling allowed to say no. You need to start feeling allowed to say what you need from them. You need to start being able to trust your partner to follow through. You need to know what you will do to take care of yourself if they don't follow through, right? And I have seen this work really, really well. And we do it by practicing having the conversations that need to be had. Once we've identified what boundaries need to be set, we practice calmly and vulnerably with a practitioner like me first, so you can get a felt sense in your body of how you can actually, your nervous system can actually feel in those moments. And then you get the practice of having a positive response. And that will help you show up more calmly and compassionately in the conversation rather than just frustrated and activated and, accusatory and resentful, which is usually what's been happening. And of course, that elicits the teenager style resistance and the defensiveness and doesn't work. So, right, it's time to try something different. And if it's you that you are listening to this and you're noticing, I may have kind of accidentally slid into some of that. Maybe I got really busy at work for a few months and I sort of stopped doing anything around the house, or gosh, I started letting, everything slide and I've been doing this kind of thing. Might be contributing to why my partner is not super turned on lately. Then if that's you, starting with some self-reflection is really helpful. So we want to ask your inner adult to take a real good look in the face at your patterns. And that's actually not that easy to do, right? It's pretty hard to take a look at our own patterns, but our inner adult is absolutely capable of doing it. However, there will be aspects you literally cannot see on your own. And that then it becomes useful to have either some outside help or to be able to open a really vulnerable conversation with your partner where you say, I really want you to tell me some of the ways that it would feel good to you where I could step up and I'm going to follow through on them and actually do them. But that again, it's a whole nother thing to then start not only noticing it, but behaving differently. So we want to also make sure you ask yourself not just what's not working, but why you've been persisting in that pattern. And if you really can't see it at all or where it comes from, you can see a therapist, you can see a coach. You might want to get some insight. If you can't see at all where it's coming from, a therapist is a good choice to help you get some insight before you try to change things. And when you're ready to change the actual behaviors, then a coach tends to be more useful. And it may or may not be a relationship coach, right? If the main struggle is managing relational anxiety, validation, your experience of intimacy and sexuality, then yes, it may be someone like me. If the issue is more practical and you genuinely have no idea how to manage tasks or run a household or share the load or parent, you may need a different kind of support, like an executive function coach, a parenting class. Maybe you just need to learn how to cook or hire a cleaner. Sometimes it really is that concrete. And then if you need to learn self-soothing as an actual practice skill, that may or may not be, I do that, other people do that. I think you could go in, if you know that about yourself, you can go find and actually interview and seek out a good therapist who can help you with self-soothing skills. But learning how to feel anxiety or doubt without immediately needing someone else to resolve it takes some time and some support and a lot of practice. So it's 100% worth it because it will change your life and make you feel infinitely better. It is. Nobody who doesn't know how to self-soothe and who's outsourcing that, it doesn't feel good. It feels desperate. And it's because you are actually not, it feels so much better to be able to do that for yourself. It's so much more powerful and it feels so much more empowered. So it is worth it, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or not. Okay, so if the close of this one, if you want to have a healthy sex life, really wonderful, juicy, yummy, playful intimacy, we can't stay in a parent-child dynamic with our partner. No one wants to have sex with someone they feel that they have to parent on a regular basis. And no one really benefits from being infantilized in real life either. So it's not like you're doing a favor for your partner by just tolerating this stuff. One, because chances are it's impacting your libido and that's not a favor to them. But also two, at the end of the day, everyone benefits from knowing how to have an adult relationship that feels free of resentment. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. All right, my friends, I'll see you here next week. Hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this show, I want to invite you to check out one of my favorite things that I've ever created. It's a free guide called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has 4 reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll find in a typical freebie, and most people feel a shift just after part 1. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to find out what your specific path looks like, I'd love to talk to you. Booking info is also in the show notes, and I will see you here next week.